Big welcome to everyone. I'm Karina Jensen, founder of Global Minds Network and a SIG leader here for Innovation Leadership at ISPIM. And I will be the moderator for this session. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our thought leader, Tamara Carleton. She's a visionary, a strategic global innovation leader, the CEO and founder of the Innovation Leadership Group, and bridging strategic foresight and innovation, where she's also lead author of a leading playbook that has helped hundreds of companies succeed in innovation. And not only that, she's a visiting professor at universities in Japan, Osaka Institute, Switzerland, St. Gallen University of St. Gallen, among others, as well as Stanford University, where she received her PhD. Tamara is also an innovation fellow at leading foundations within the US. As she continues to inspire innovation around the world through her practices and research and training. So we look very much forward to learning more insights about innovating during these turbulent times. So welcome, Tamara.
Thank you, Karina. Very lovely introduction. So thrilled to be part of the ISPIM virtual conference. You can see my topic here is Innovating After the Pandemic. A little bit of my bias in sharing two elements with you today. You heard from Karina. I run an innovation firm that sits in Silicon Valley, and I work with a number of organizations, particularly large corporations, but others worldwide. And across all of these industries and companies, many of them are wrestling with the challenge of how do you figure out the future? How do you roadmap a plan ahead? We're in turbulent times during the pandemic, of course, but change is always coming, regardless of which decade or year you're in. And so what I thought might be most helpful for people in this conference, and as you go back to work and think about what to do next, is to share one, a model of thinking about the future, and then some ways about knowing if you're making progress moving forward. So some of you may be familiar with a horizon model. This has been introduced decades ago and really lays out understanding how do you plan for the near, mid, and far terms. So if you think about Horizon 1, H1 for short, this is really a focus on near-term planning. The products or solutions that you have underway, the profit margins for your company. Horizon 2, or H2, is really the midterm growth. What are the growth opportunities that you have coming in? What's next in your product lineup? Are you already thinking about what's coming next? Horizon 3, H3, is really the longer focus. Some companies don't plan this far ahead, but you can certainly see examples of those that are testing these perspectives. And this is really much more a long-term push. As you think about these three horizons, another way to consider it is saying Horizon 1 is a focus on sustaining. Do you have the profitability margins in place versus H2 is growth, and H3 is really breakthrough. Working with different companies and just playing with language here so you can see how to think about this a little bit more. You're looking to productize products and solutions, really try and make money, versus in H2, your focus is on finding new markets, where are your next set of customers, NBD, new business development, versus H3 is often in a corporate setting, you're looking at technologies coming out of a lab. This is projects happening in R&D. With one of my companies, this is actually a food manufacturer, they translated this internally as saying, okay, H1 is core business. We have a very large portfolio. This is what's keeping the lights on. Versus H2, they phrased as new to the company. And this was a way to help their teams understand how to think about bigger ideas. And then really the stretch for them in H3 was to say new to industry. And then of course, in pandemic times, our focus in many companies in H1 is simply survive. But to get through this, and my focus, of course, is innovating after the pandemic, is how do you start to stabilize and how do you start to lay the foundations to grow? And you can see here across all these three horizons, they all start with today. And most of your energy may, of course, be focused on the first horizon. But you then think about what's the ratio across all three. You know, is it a split of 80, 20, 10%? Or do you start to shift the energy, investments, resources more into H2 as you start to regain footing? So here's an example from Facebook, a technology company, has increased use worldwide. And if you wind back to 2016, Mark Zuckerberg, founder and CEO of the company, was presenting at their developer conference called Fate. And you can see behind him a 10-year roadmap. And I'm going to have us zoom in so you can see here a little more closely. We have in Horizon 1 ecosystems. So this is in 3 years, Mark believes that you need to have, this is again back in 2016, a platform where you reach 1 billion users and that creates a full immersive experience, which Facebook was doing at the time. Now, his second horizon you can see is called products. And this is over a 5-year time span. You see a number of products here. It's a mix of in-house and acquired. So WhatsApp and Instagram back in 2016 had been acquired, but these were developing their own communities. They were starting to make money, but weren't fully profitable. And so he put them in Horizon 2 with his management team. And then as you look further out into H3, in 10 years, these were new and emerging technologies that were on his company's radar. And you can see some different categories: connectivity, AI, VR, AR, so virtual reality, augmented reality, that he was looking to move into products and then ultimately into ecosystems. Now, companies often do roadmaps, and I was pleasantly and delightedly surprised to see in 2018, Facebook stayed with this roadmap. And you can see same 3 horizons, 3, 5, and 10, they moved the blue dot. So if you can see here, the 2018 has made progress, but there's been a couple of notable changes. You can see from Horizon 2 into 1, Instagram graduated. And we can see that has existed in recent years as its own platform, has 1 billion customers. Now, Mark thinks very boldly. Not every company would have that same metric to say what moves from H2 into H1 solutions. And then in H2, you can see a few more elements have been added. Notably, right behind where he's standing on stage, you see workplace and marketplace as new products that have been introduced. And what's become interesting, marketplace has been a priority in the last year. And about, 3 weeks ago, Facebook announced that this was going to be a priority for the company. So they're accelerating it into what I would consider more H1 focus. And then as response to the pandemic, workplace has, of course, been increased in use. How do you support teams distributed with remote collaboration and communication? All of that has grown as well. And then not only have acronyms been expanded under H3, but a few others have been added. Facebook has continued using this roadmap, and you can see, if you look at 2019 with the, updates around the developer conference, it was flashed on screen. We're waiting to see with 2020. But I don't want us to stop with 3 horizons. And one thing you don't see in the Facebook roadmap, but you certainly know Mark Zuckerberg and his management team are doing, and is something that all companies should consider, which is beyond the 3rd horizon. Where do you look to find those ideas that inform R&D and emerging technologies efforts? And this to me translates into H4. This is an effort on visionary growth and some of the sources where you can find the new ideas. You can look to movies, science fiction, fables, and stories provide possibilities around how you look at over the horizon. When you travel, and hopefully that returns with each month, you see different examples because the future is not evenly distributed, as you might have heard from writer William Gibson. And so, in terms of mobile use, how countries like Japan and Korea are experimenting with applications and new developments versus countries in Europe versus the US often lags behind in many ways, let alone in Africa with new payment systems and such. And then communities, you could see different investments and experiments happening with foundations, XPRIZE Foundation, for example, looking to accelerate new ideas and move them into H3 prototypes, and then ultimately to drive corporate growth and interest across H2 and H1. So different ways to think about this. Very fast introduction, but you can see, bringing it all together, 4 horizons for planning ahead and understanding how you can split activities for your innovation activities. And so with this in mind, the question comes up, particularly as I talk with partners and companies, is how do you know that you're moving ahead with your roadmap? What are some of the tools and ways that you can support different elements? And so I wanted to share an idea called zero-based innovation. And this actually goes back or has roots from the 1970s. And some of you may be familiar with the concept of zero-based budgeting. So this is a comic from Marketunist, and you can see here at the top, we're doing zero-based budgeting now. So we have to justify every expense each period. Unfortunately, we did get approval to turn on the lights, but we'll try again next quarter. And the whole idea comes from the world of finance. As you can see here in this cartoon, you do regular reviews. It could be quarterly, it's typically annual with companies. So Heinz has been a big proponent of zero-based budgeting. During the US administration with Jimmy Carter, they actually applied it to the entire government, and other companies have picked it up. And what it is to start from zero. At each period, you say, what is the rationale for this expense? How does this budget line item fit into what we need? And it's really to challenge the assumptions and realign with strategic objectives. And so this has been renewed in the last decade. And what I think becomes an interesting extension of this concept and expanding it around a zero-based mindset is to apply this towards zero-based innovation. And zero-based innovation, or ZBI for short, is about systematically reviewing and reaffirming all your innovation programs and operations across your innovation horizons. So it's that notion of starting from zero, where you're looking at nothing, but you're doing this with fresh eyes and challenging all the assumptions you have. And of course, during pandemic times, many of us had to reset and reconsider, why do we need this? Is this critical? Do we have not just budget, but is this the right time for what we're trying to do? And I'm going to bring this back to how groups and companies typically think about how they plan ahead for the future. And in the context of innovation, many of you may do this or know of groups that do, where let's say you have a multi-year initiative, and then right around the year 2 mark or sometime through, leaders, and particularly it's a select group of leadership who gets together at an offsite and they look at everything that's been going on, they discuss. Offsites have, I think, a mixed outcome with companies. It's a love-hate relationship. And then later the announcements go out, what is still continued. Budgets are often then approved based on what was funded prior years, and it's really just a percentage increase or decrease to say, does this fit with what we need? And you move forward. Very structured, but often a lot of things are continued, and often excess baggage is continued, versus if you then look at what is a different type of strategy, something that you might call ad hoc, where decisions are driven by crisis or personality. The agenda might start with very good intentions, but then starts to become more fragmented, or it's not as clearly organized. And so your programs are this mishmash of old and new. We've seen this before. It's not necessarily highly aligned with each other, or different budgets then get lost by group or by project. It's much more of a haphazard plan. You still have a focus on innovation, and there may be great results in one area, but it's not as evenly spread. And certainly in terms of being more strategic about efforts over near, mid, and far, these aren't tied together as well as you might like to see. If we contrast this with taking more of an approach with zero-based innovation, at every year, 1, 2, or 3, or you could do this more regularly, you then bring the attention to all the groups, and it's more of a bottom-up approach, and you ask every group to consider each program like it's a new proposal. And it's not to necessarily reset, it's more to say, why are we doing this? Is this the right time? Does this make sense? And you don't automatically assume that it has to continue. In many cases it might, because the reasons you originally started probably still apply. But it's a way to make sure that you're doing this with full intentionality, but also allows you to make sure that this is tightly aligned with where you want to be in terms of your future impact. And one of the ways that you can counter just justifying with a near-term focus, or that you're picking your favorite projects in the moment, is to say, how does this fit across all our horizons? How does this work for where we want to be? And so if you were to then bring the 4-horizon framework back into place, and you can see here I aligned it with year 1, but you could again do this at any point, is to say, we're not trying to kill everything. And often people think about resetting to 0 as an invitation to blow up ideas or initiatives that don't make as much sense. It's much more about engaging everybody into being very reflective. And it's not to say that has to be full attention, a time-intensive review. It's more to be very agile to say, does this make sense? Do we need to actually continue doing this? And it allows you to be much more resourceful and deliberate about understanding why you're doing these different activities. And you can see some of the questions on the right that your team can ask during this evaluation. Where does this program fit on our horizon map? So in the example of Facebook, when do they know to move Instagram from H2 into H1? Does this fit our criteria? Do we know this fits into our strategic plan? And then as you're looking at this initiative with fresh eyes, to say, who should be on the team? Do we have the right champions in place? Are we investing enough? Should we actually be funding this activity more? Do we need to engage different types of partners? All of this is part of the discussion to then look at these ideas in a broader light, to say, we really want to understand how we're doing what we're doing and how this can all fit together in more intentional ways, and really allowing people to bring these threads together so they understand how this fits into the broader roadmap for where they want to go. And so this is a way to tie all of it together. But I didn't want to just tease you with 2 ideas. I thought it might be helpful to share some places of where to look. So if you're interested in understanding more around zero-based innovation and the zero-based mindset, 3 quick resources, and I'm happy to share more. Late 2018, McKinsey has done a number of articles. This particular one really looks at the principles around thinking in terms of a zero-based mindset. Deloitte, consulting firm as well, also in 2018, did an extensive report, and they, as an accounting firm by heart and soul, started with zero-based budgeting, but also looked at some lessons and insights about how this can apply a little more broadly. And then a more recent book, also from a consultant, looked at applying zero-based budgeting to zero-based everything. And how do you think about this to change your company and team performance? Actually, this is a whole emerging area, so there's not a lot being developed around this. And if you're interested to also apply some practical tools, not just the mindset, I'm partial to this playbook, partly because I was part of the team developing it, but there's a number of other resources that are available and that you'll probably hearing from some of the excellent speakers as part of the conference. But you can see here, free tools that you're welcome to download from the link here, innovation.io/playbook. But if you're more of a print person, you can buy a copy from Amazon. It is quite extensive, but it does allow you to look at different tools that you can apply by horizon, but also by innovation objective. Are you trying to look at competitive advantage? Are you looking to build more team cohesion? Are you trying to look at, let's say you're in H3, ways to experiment with different types of prototypes or test how visionary your idea might be? All of this is available in the Playbook for Strategic Foresight and Innovation. So I want to share this as just another resource that you can use wherever you might be in your innovation journey. So I think that provides us a very quick and hopefully helpful look at understanding about innovating after the pandemic. And let me pause here and thank you for generously sharing your time with me during these crazy times we share together, and then open it up for questions and comments from the group. Karina, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me now? So wonderful insights. Thank you, Tamara. And I can attest that it's an excellent guide starting the reading journey. I can see we already have a few questions. Thank you from one of our attendees, from Camilo, for a very insightful and exciting perspective. Which visions of the future have inspired you recently?
Oh, excellent, challenging question. Which visions lately? I think actually, coming from also a competitor, Facebook, but Google, they had a huge project around sidewalk labs that was based in Toronto, and really looking to understand the future of the city and how communities could work together in urban environments, but also really engage the broader ecosystem in the city to live together and not just use technology, but to consider all different ways to enhance work life and play. And both due to, I think, the investments, but also other decisions at play. This initiative was just phased out, but there's a number of wonderful graphics, discussions, and ideas introduced around this. You can find this online, and a lot has been publicly shared. And to me, that's one fascinating example of a big idea to try and go beyond how people think about what's possible, and also to make it more tractable. How can we work together? What are specific ideas, and how do we engage all different groups in understanding what you can do and become very proactive in building a future together? So that's one right off the top of my head, and something I constantly look for as other examples, just because you can find visions in many different places. Another quick one, and it comes out of work that I've been doing at Stanford University. For the last few summers, we've been running a summer program called Silicon Valley Innovation Academy. And I'm not working typically with business managers. Instead, this is with high school students and college students. Our focus is around helping them develop moonshot ideas. So really big thoughts, and ultimately these are visions of what they would like to do to change the future. And it's a wonderful way to invite them to bring their ideas forward and not just go with what a teacher might say or other authority figures, but instead how they see what they want to change as a young generation. And so hearing their different visions is really inspiring and challenges my views. I'm not that old necessarily, but it definitely reminds me how much the youth think about what's possible. And this summer, as a lot has moved online, we've tried to take this into a global movement and really empower communities in different places who can't come to Stanford, but want to take this moonshot mindset into their own environments in Pakistan, in Western Australia, in parts of Canada and Switzerland and Mexico and such, and say, how do we think like this? So another example that comes from personal experience that also really excites me.
That's great. Well, the questions keep coming. We have a question from, let's see. Oh, we have a second question here in terms of a wonderful presentation again. Do you have any example with respect to failures with Horizon 2 and 3 from your consulting?
So advice around Horizon 2 and 3. So I would say for Horizon 2, I think one of the biggest advice is to really break from your assumptions today and particularly think about new types of customers and really help consider what are emerging future needs that are coming from other types of user groups and understand how your customers are changing. And I think that's one of the ways that you can realize some things about your customers will still be fundamental and you don't want to lose sight of that, but then you need to look for the signals of what might be changing as your customers are moving into different spaces or their needs are shifting that you need to be paying attention to. So I'd mentioned the playbook for strategic foresight and innovation. One of the tools that we like to use, particularly in support of H2 discussions, is called Future User. And this is a way to compare and develop personas around your major user groups to say, here's what we understand around today's customer base, and here's what we actually think might be changing. And then that starts to build your awareness of what is different or what you need to perhaps pay more attention to. And then you can build those insights into your product planning. So quick answer there. And then in terms of H3, I think this is really about, one, encouraging much more experimentation in your teams. And you have different examples where Google allows their employees to set aside up to 10% of their time to really explore new ideas. Corning, excuse me, I was trying to think of the company name, also does a similar technique, but you can do this very informally and organically to say, how are we prototyping? Are we getting together and looking at mini tests? And these are ways to think about a similar R&D, but also ask whoever in your group, who's paying attention to emerging technologies? Is there someone on our team that maybe you take turns, or maybe this is a rotating role every 6 months to say, are we paying attention to emerging technologies? Do we even know what are the top 10 emerging ideas and technologies that we should be watching? And therefore, when they become more interesting, we start to know who are the partners, who are the vendors, who are the experts in these spaces that we can start to turn to when we're more ready. Because part of that knowledge then helps you be better prepared as you're moving from 3 to 2 to 1 in horizons, but also to be aware the future doesn't stop. So each day you get closer to this future, and it's a little like planning for New Year's resolutions. You just suddenly don't want to be 3 months, 6 months later and say, oh my gosh, where did that time go? You can be a little bit more aware each day, each week.
Great. Thank you for the question, Lokesh. We have one more question. We have 2 minutes left, so I'm hoping we can squeeze one more question in. And this is from Mendel. He says, very insightful, Tamara. Do you have any specific tips on aligning conflicting internal stakeholders, existing transformation programs, for example, around such a zero-based or horizon-based approach?
Great question. And rarely will you be able to have instant or full agreement when you introduce a new idea. Change is scary, and often what might be very clear to you or your team isn't necessarily as obvious to another group, even if it's within your own company or function. So some of this comes down to fundamentals around organizational change and alignment. Other of this comes down to human psychology. So the short, quick answer, and we can talk more later, you're welcome to follow up. And of course, ISPIM has huge resources and tools to share as well. First, communicate often and regularly, both in terms of top-down and bottom-up. So top-down, prepare a set of messages for your senior leadership, and also they should take ownership to really drive forward and help people understand why you're doing what you're doing. So this comes to being clear about the vision. Elon Musk is relentless as an example of a Silicon Valley icon who provides that clear messaging. But then bottom up, different teams should feel that they're part of this. And so to step forward, and it takes courage and it takes repeated or continuous communication to say, we think this is important. And that's how you start to build alignment, is brick by brick and helping people to do this. And there's a number of tools to then support the communication. but it really comes down to some of these very basic human elements to make the idea real and to engage everybody, and then ultimately how you can make it really touch everybody in the best possible sense. So I'm glad to hear these questions because it realizes that you're thinking about this, and I'd love to have you do more and stay in touch as you move forward with both zero-based innovation, but also thinking in terms of these 4 horizons.
Wonderful. We have to close the session already. We're at the end of our 30 minutes, but a very big thank you to Tamara for your inspirations and insights, and thanks to everyone for your questions.